hang yourself, I'm killing you. Only reason I ain't got you because they get you loose. Come here!
He's kicking the back of the line.
Come here, little brother! Little motherfucker, bitch! I'm killing you! How you hear it? How you hear it? I'm gonna fucking kill you! Bitch! Oh, you little bitch! You scared motherfucker! Come on! The fucking pump? The fucking one we at you. The fucking judge your fucking niggers.
Hey! 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 Deputy Colonel Sheriff's Office! Huh?
Don't do like that.
You parked in the middle of the road!
Oh, no.
You are too!
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the road! How much you had to drink tonight? More than an hour? Alright, do me a favor, step on out! Get on out!
Bye.
Hey! Hey! Go! Get out of the fucking car! Get out of the car!
I will.
Get out of the car now!
I will.
Get out of the car!
I will, man. Look at that.
Get out of the car!
Get out.
Get out!
Get out.
Get out!
I am.
Get out of the car!
I am.
Greetings, my name is Ed Haas Turlington of Haas Turlington's Bee and Goat Farm, located 20 miles outside Jay, Oklahoma, and 4 miles from the borders of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. In addition to running the farm with my wife and 4 young children, I'm the proprietor of First Families Research and Security. I'm a disabled veteran and retired from the military, a certified Oklahoma private investigator, and a former law enforcement officer. The purpose of this documentary is to expose how a law enforcement officer can make one bad assumption up front and then refuse to accept new information that would refute the original assumption. This refusal to admit any error then leads to the prosecution of an innocent person. In this case, the innocent man is me. The bottom line is, the sheriff wouldn't have found the probable cause he needed to order my arrest had the lead investigator not concealed and altered evidence in his probable cause affidavit. In 2014, I caught a group of men trespassing, burning an illegal fire, and apparently involved in drug activity on my family property. They had taken the license plate off of their truck, and all 3 fled when I pulled over. One of them, a convicted drug dealer with a rap sheet of dangerous and violent convictions spanning over 30 years, Daryl Philpott, called me a punk motherfucker, and assaulted me with a glass bottle. I shot him once in the leg, downward, away from his vital organs, from about arm's length away, in self-defense. Everything that follows shows how one law enforcement officer shaped an investigation for a predetermined outcome, coached witnesses, and withheld exculpatory evidence, leading to a decision from the district attorney to prosecute me. Of course, the district attorney was presented with a manipulated set of facts, so he did not make an informed decision. Together, Delaware and Ottawa counties form Oklahoma's 13th Judicial District. My brother Lance and I grew up in Delaware and Ottawa counties in the extreme northeast corner of Oklahoma, and are directly descended from 8 pioneers of those counties, going back to when they were an Indian Territory district. My great-great-grandfather, John Duke Kelly, pioneered Afton in the 1870s after serving in the war as a cavalry officer. His son, William Kelly, owned the Fairland Pool Hall, married Emma Bacher, the daughter of Afton Indian Territory Constable Phineas Bacher. Their son, my grandfather, Robert Kelly, grew up in Fairland and married my grandmother, Merle Maxine Simmons, a Fullerton descendant from Afton. He died in the Philippines in World War II when my mother, Nancy, was 2 weeks old. The Fullertons were Miami Indian Territory pioneers. My cousin, Sam Fullerton Sr., became the first presiding judge of Oklahoma's 13th Judicial District upon statehood. My parents met in the early 60s at NEO A&M in Miami. My father, a fifth-generation Floridian, attended on a football and track scholarship, while my mother attended on a North Star scholarship. After my father's service as an Air Force electronics officer during Vietnam, they returned to Delaware County to raise my brother Lance and me. In the 70s, my brother Lance and I grew up in Delaware County. We lived in Xena when our father was the high school principal at Grove. Our cousin, Earl Kelly, a World War II and Korean War veteran, was the Grove Elementary School principal. Our cousin Kelly Hampton was the high school counselor. In the 80s, my father was the Afton School superintendent in Ottawa County, where my little brother Lance and I attended from elementary to high school. My father served as an infantry officer in Oklahoma's 45th Infantry Brigade during this time. By the 90s, my brother Lance and I had joined the military. I joined the 82nd Airborne Division, and my brother joined the 45th as an infantryman in Nowata. Dean Bridges was his platoon leader. Later, Lance was commissioned into the regular Army. When he was a captain, the Army sent him to law school. He's now a full-blood colonel in the Army JAG Corps. After I was discharged from the regular Army, I joined Oklahoma's 45th Infantry Brigade, and Dean was my platoon sergeant at Delta Company in Tulsa and at Charlie Company in Claremore. I retired from the 45th in 2017. By this time, my father returned to Delaware County. My youngest brother, Reb, went to school at Oaks Indian Mission and Concord prior to joining the 45th Infantry and serving in Iraq, where he suffered traumatic brain damage. When my father was superintendent at Oaks Indian Mission, he made national headlines for getting the State Department of Education to recognize Cherokee as a foreign language for graduation requirements. When my father was high school principal at Concord, Kelly Hampton was his superintendent. The first row of the thousands of veterans' names engraved in the Delaware County Veterans Memorial Walk of Honor in front of the county courthouse in Jay lists me, my brothers, my father, my grandfather, and his grandfather, and Dean Bridges, the former 45th Infantry Brigade Combat Team Command Sergeant Major, who grew up with us in Afton and we consider a brother. Note that none of the people involved in my prosecution, the DA, the prosecutor, the sheriff, or the lead investigator who made my arrest possible by concealing and altering exculpatory evidence, none of them are from here. None of them have ever served their country or really respect the integrity of what it means to be a veteran. They have certainly never risked anything for the people of Delaware and Ottawa counties. For over 200 years, wanted men have crossed the border into what is now Oklahoma from Missouri and Arkansas to avoid the authorities. Prior to statehood, there were no counties, therefore no sheriffs, and very little law enforcement. This has been the subject of both books and movies. True Grit, The Outlaw Josie Wales, and Hang 'em High are a few well-known westerns on this theme.
There you are. The Oklahoman Indian Territory, year of our Lord 1889. 19 marshals. I was authorized 60 when I came here. Told the president even that was not half enough. 19 marshals and 1 court to cover near 70,000 square miles. A happy hunting ground filled with bushwhackers, horse thieves, whiskey peddlers, counterfeiters, hide peelers, marauders that'll kill you for a hat band. Now that's why there's a badge in my desk, Cooper. Itching to sit on somebody's chest, and no takers.
Your marshals do cover a lot of territory.
In the present day, criminals still migrate across the border from Missouri and Arkansas into Oklahoma, but for a very different reason. Whereas their criminal predecessors took advantage of the lack of law enforcement, today's criminals seek refuge in Oklahoma's Delaware County because of the sheriff's soft-on-crime catch and release police informant protection program. By the time I had reached my jail cell the night of the shooting, my cellmates knew my name and who I had shot. They were the first to tell me the drug dealer I shot was well known as a long-term police informant, and as such was not only immune from prosecution here, but was actively protected by the Delaware County Sheriff. Sources in the law enforcement community later confirmed this. The sheriff had no idea who I was. He and the undersheriff aren't from around here. They aren't even from Oklahoma. The undersheriff knew what his informant did for a living, assumed I was one of his informant's clients, and the shooting was over a drug deal gone bad. They did not know I am a former law enforcement officer, a military retiree, and a certified private investigator. Rural law enforcement agencies, which often don't have the funding necessary to properly investigate crimes, have increasingly relied on the testimony of informants over the last several decades. So much so that an informal system has developed of law enforcement agencies taking it easy or even protecting informants, and in return, informants telling the law enforcement agencies what they need to secure convictions. Best-selling author and attorney John Grisham wrote a nonfiction book titled The Innocent Man about rural Oklahoma cops doing exactly this, and it resulted in one man on death row before DNA evidence cleared him. Netflix made The Innocent Man into a documentary series last year. I suggest you watch it. In my case, the prosecutor is basing his position on this drug dealer informant's testimony and on fundamental misunderstanding or mischaracterization of the pictures of the wounds that show the exact opposite of what the prosecutor asserts. More importantly, it's obvious that the drug dealer snitch that I shot was being protected by law enforcement throughout the investigation. Oklahoma has a strong tradition of favoring individual rights over government control, and this is especially true with issues surrounding gun rights and self-defense. Along this same line of thought that the citizen can protect himself, his family, and his community, Oklahoma has a very aggressive citizen's arrest statute. In fact, in Oklahoma, a citizen has just as much right to arrest the sheriff as the sheriff has to arrest the citizen. Sections 202 through 205 of Title 22 in Oklahoma statutes cover what is known as citizen's arrest. According to Section 202, authority of private person to arrest another, a private person may arrest another for a public offense committed or attempted in his presence. As you're about to see from the sheriff's own statements, statements by the prosecution's witnesses, court transcripts, and photographs from the sheriff's investigation, there were a litany of public offenses taking place when I executed the citizen's arrest against the convicted drug dealer and career criminal Daryl Philpott. Then Section 202 goes on to list two more conditions for citizen's arrest. These three conditions are copied verbatim in Section 196, warrantless arrest by police officer. According to Section 203, arrest by private person, informing person of the cause, a citizen is not required to inform the arrested individual of the nature of the arrest when the arrested individual is caught in the actual commission of the offense, or when he is arrested on pursuit immediately after its commission. Again, the exact same verbatim is used in Section 199 for police officers. Section 204 authorizes a private person to break a door or window of a dwelling of another private person to make a felony arrest, just like Section 197 gives that same authority to police officers, and so on. As for self-defense, Section 1289.25 of Oklahoma Title 21, physical or deadly force against an intruder, authorizes a person to stand his or her ground and meet force with force, including deadly force, if he or she reasonably believes it is necessary to do so to prevent death or great bodily harm. Note that Colorado, where our sheriff was born and raised, has no stand your ground law. Worse yet, in Boston, where the prosecutor in my case, Nick Lelikus, was born and raised, citizens not only don't have the right to stand their ground if attacked by another citizen, in Boston, victims have a legal duty to flee from their attacker. I'm not saying that Sheriff Harlan Moore and the prosecutor Nick Lelikus, in my case, are trying to apply the laws of their home states, but what I am saying is that culturally, the sheriff and the prosecutor are uncomfortable with the idea that citizens don't have to run away, but that citizens can stand and fight. But that is the law in Oklahoma. The following photographs were taken by the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and are part of the official investigation. Here is East County Road 370, the dirt road I live on. Note the no trespassing sign. Out of 112 pictures taken the night of the shooting by the investigators, they all avoided showing this sign, which can't be missed from the county road. The following day, Detective Frank Miller, who is no longer with the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, went out on his own time in his private truck and took pictures of the entire crime scene, including this one that shows the pallet where the trespassers were burning their fire was clearly on my side of the no trespassing sign. Technically, as we've seen, it doesn't matter where it took place. If these guys are on Main Street in front of the post office, or if they're in their own front yard, I still have the right to make an arrest for public offense. But by not taking a picture of the no trespassing sign the night of the investigation, the investigator was trying to make my version of events as weak as possible. So, about 2 weeks after closing on our family farm, this is what I saw. 3 men standing around a fire under this no trespassing sign that is impossible to miss from the county road, just in front of my tree line about 100 feet from the road. Joseph Bradley, Philpott's cousin, and the brother of my neighbor, Jack Bradley, Thomas, sat in his car in the road and appeared to me to be a lookout for the men. The 3 men were surrounded with an assortment of cans and bottles. This picture of camp fuel was taken by Delaware County Sheriff's Office. Camp fuel is a primary ingredient in methamphetamine processing. Philpott previously admitted to being a habitual meth user to his parole officer and has been convicted for felony drug dealing, and as recently as 2016 was convicted for his most recent methamphetamine felony. The trespassers took one look at me, then immediately all began walking to a tagless truck that didn't have license plates, parked on my property, abandoning their fire. Leaving a fire unextinguished is a public offense. I noticed they had removed the license plates from the truck they had parked in the tree line on my property. As a former law enforcement officer and a recently Oklahoma certified private investigator taught by Police Chief Mark Wall, who's also a former J mayor, I immediately recognized that the trespassers were engaged in criminal activity. I noticed that they had taken the license plate off the truck so they couldn't be identified if anyone spotted them trespassing, cooking meth, or robbing local houses. I lawfully executed a citizen's arrest. Philpott, the convicted drug dealer and apparently the gang leader, walked back to the fire and I followed. Once at the fire, with me still holding him at gunpoint, Philpott grabbed a bottle off the ground. Here is where our versions of events really begin to differ. I told the sheriff's department exactly what happened, which is that Philpott assaulted me, much like he assaulted the arresting officers in the police videos at the beginning of this documentary. And I shot him one time in self-defense in his leg away from his vital organs. Philpott later testified at the preliminary hearing that he grabbed a bottle off the ground to check to see if the recent rain had somehow filled it with enough raindrops to extinguish the fire he had started, then abandoned on the land that he had trespassed. Then, according to Philpott, he turned away from me and I shot him in the back of his leg as he was in retreat. Philpott didn't mention arming himself with a glass bottle when he was interviewed the night of the shooting because the investigator, Melvin Gale Wells, failed to ask Philpott if he was armed. After I shot Philpott, instead of his accomplices taking him to the nearest emergency room in Grove, Oklahoma, they took him to his cousin, Jack Bradley Thomas's house, where Philpott changed clothes. Then they took him to the emergency room in another state where Joseph Bradley, the man that appeared to be the lookout from before, his cousin, worked. Philpott's clothes were soaked with meth residue when he attacked me. Getting rid of that evidence would be one reason to change clothes. Another would be to make it more difficult to identify him from committing crimes earlier. You'll have to ask yourself why Philpott chose to change clothes, then go to an emergency room in another state, instead of go directly to the closest emergency room after he was shot, because the lead investigator, Gale Wells, failed to ask Philpott either of these questions. We do know that while Philpott was busy changing clothes, I called 911 to get Philpott an ambulance and inform the county sheriff's office of the shooting and that I was coming in to make a statement. I called 911 the night of the shooting. Philpott did not. This is page 6 of the probable cause affidavit. In Oklahoma, the probable cause affidavit, or PC affidavit, is a report issued by an arresting agency to the district attorney explaining why it was more likely than not that the person they arrested was committing the crime for which he was arrested. It is a summary of the investigation and not a complete report. Based on the district attorney's review of the PC affidavit, he may decide to change the charges, add charges, or in some instances, drop charges altogether. For this reason, it is a crime to withhold exculpatory evidence from the PC affidavit to the district attorney. Exculpatory evidence is any evidence that is favorable to the defense. At the top of the page, you can see highlight in yellow, Philpott calling me a punk, just as he did the police officer in the opening video of this documentary. And you can see Philpott challenging me to fight, just as he did the police officer in the police video at the beginning of this documentary. Then you can see highlight in yellow, Philpott claiming I shot him in the back of the leg. Finally, you see highlight in yellow, Detective Wells' assessment of the gun wound. It states, the wound appeared to be a through-and-through small caliber gunshot to the right thigh from back to front. That statement made by Detective Wells is known as a conclusory statement in law, and conclusory statements do not belong in cops' sworn statements in police reports any more than they belong in a witness testament in court. A conclusory statement is an assertion for which no supporting evidence is offered. When someone makes a conclusory statement in law, they are engaging in weak thinking, or they are lying, or both. This determination on the directional path of the bullet was made by Renzel Reardon, the registered nurse who tended to Philpott the night he attacked me. Renzel is specially trained as a wound nurse, and he was the only person at the hospital the night of the shooting with the medical qualification to decide on the directional path of the bullet. As you can see, Renzel states, gunshot wound, right upper thigh, from anterior to posterior, through and through. Detective Wells left out Renzel the wound nurse's determination from the probable cause report to the district attorney, and in its place wrote his own conclusory statement. This was at least the second time Detective Wells withheld exculpatory evidence from the district attorney, the first being the no trespassing sign that somehow didn't make it into the 112 photographs taken the night of the investigation, although it was impossible to miss from the road. A typical investigation may result in 100 or even hundreds of photographs. Of course, the district attorney does not have time to sort through everything himself. That is why he relies on the investigator to provide him with the best objective evidence. These are two of the high-resolution color photographs of the wounds taken by Detective Wells the night of the shooting that clearly show the bullet traveled from the front of the thigh to the rear, as determined by the wound specialist. But Detective Wells chose not to submit these pictures to the district attorney. Instead, he chose to include grainy, out-of-focus, black and white, 4-inch by 5-inch photographs. Only one of the two photographs Wells included in his report even shows the wound at all, and it is too close and out of focus to tell what part of leg the wound is on. For a through-and-through gunshot wound, both wounds must be compared with each other to tell which is the entry and which is the exit. The second of the two photographs Wells included in his report to the district attorney didn't show the wound at all, just a picture of Philpott looking sad in his hospital bed. For comparison, note the large color, high-resolution photos that Wells left out of his report, choosing these instead. You have to ask yourself, why would Deputy Wells do this? A reasonable person might conclude that the average farmer, hunter, shooter, raised in rural Oklahoma knows an entry wound and an exit wound when they see one. We know the entry is small, the exit is big, just like the wound nurse said. Furthermore, here we have a secondary hole. If you zoom in on this secondary hole, which you can do at my website, firstfamilies.net, you can clearly see that this is streaming blood as well. Bullets don't fragment prior to hitting targets. They fragment after contact. Again, gun people know this. In addition to gun people knowing this, the medical personnel who specialize in wounds know this. As you can see, there was no attempt to clean the wound on the front of the leg prior to taking the picture. If you zoom in on that wound, again, which you can do at firstfamilies.net, you will see most of what appears to be the wound is a blood drop. If the projectile strikes at an angle, the injury will be elliptical, and the long axis of the ellipse will lie approximately in the plane the bullet traveled, which is what we have here. Philpott described the wound in the front of his leg as oblong in the preliminary trial transcripts. As we have already mentioned, the exit wound is usually larger than the entrance wound, and this is because as the round moves through the body of the victim, it slows down and explodes within the tissue and surrounding muscle. The slowing down of the projectile means that as it reaches the end of its trajectory, it has to force harder to push through. This equates to the exit wound normally looking larger and considerably more destructive than its precursor, the entrance wound. Exit wounds often bleed profusely as they are larger, but entrance wounds can sometimes look only like small holes. The third time the lead detective withheld exculpatory evidence is when, instead of putting color high-resolution photographs of the wound in the PC affidavit he sent to the district attorney, he put two out-of-focus, grainy black and white photos, one that didn't even show the wound.
You got something right there.
Whoa, we got ladies present. Come on, man.
Excuse me, ladies.
This one's about that.
That's the only thing I got.
Here from New Orleans. Yeah, I found that town too mean. I needed a place to stay and talk, and I found it in Arkansas. I ran out of beer, I wanted more, so I went to the grocery store, and I said, where do you keep your beer? They said 40 miles from here. Well, we can't buy liquor, so we make speed. We can't buy beer, we grow weed. We do our best to avoid the law in the dry counties of Arkansas. called the natural state. Now we got rivers, we got lakes, and it's so beautiful to be there. Come and visit and bring some beer. We can't buy liquor, so we make smooth. We can't buy beers, we grow weed. We do our best to avoid the law in the dry counties of Arkansas. Another Saturday night, and nowhere to go, no place in sight, nothing to do after dark. Hey, let's go shoplift at the Walmart. We can't buy liquor, we're all on speed. We can't buy beer, we smoke weed. We do our best to avoid the law in the dry counties of Arkansas. We can't buy liquor, we're all on speed. Can't buy beer, so we smoke weed. We do our best to avoid the law in the dry counties of Arkansas. We do our best to avoid the law in dry county Arkansas. More banjo, what? That's what I like to hear.